Alright, so this is part 2 of interpreting rate of change and y-intercepts in a real-world context. This one we will talk about a new formula that we're going to use a lot, and you will use anytime you're going to graph a straight line. Okay, now let's practice. So first of all, we're going to use the formula called y equals mx plus b. Okay. You guys should have heard this in middle school. You should have learned this last year. This is something very, very common. It is one of the most important things in probably algebra that you will learn. So we'll spend a couple of days on this. Okay, so each one of these, this is a formula, and each one of these variables means something. So first of all, the most important parts of these is what we call the m. Okay. And that m stands for the slope. Okay. So notice what's attached to the m. The x. So the slope, and it's always attached to a variable. Okay. So the slope is always going to be attached to a variable. Now, for the most part, it will be attached to the x, but just in case the problem doesn't use x, it's always the one attached to a variable. Okay, the b in the problem, so we have my m. Now the b in the problem, the b is called the y-intercept. Okay, and as we learned in the previous video, the y-intercept is where the line or the graph hits the y-axis. So where does this graph hit the y-axis? That is called the y-intercept. Now the y-intercept, we use this as our starting point. So the y-intercept is our starting point on this graph, okay? And that's probably the most important parts of these two of this equation, okay? So let's practice. So first of all, it says to graph y equals 2x plus 3. Alright, so there's a couple things we just learned. We just learned that m stands for slope and b stands for our y-intercept. Now, if you notice, this graph is different than the other graphs we've used, okay? This one has 4 coordinates. Alright, it's an actual graph now. Now when we have 4 coordinates, we're going to start with 0 here. If I go up, my numbers are positive. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. If I go down, my numbers are negative. Negative 1, negative 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay. If I go to the right, my numbers are positive. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And if I go to my left, my numbers are negative. Negative 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay? So up is positive, down is negative, to the right is positive, to the left is negative. So, let's go ahead and let's start with our starting point. And I said that my starting point was b. So is there anything in this one that is similar to the b here? What number is b? Well, if I just look, it's the number not attached to my x, which is 3. So my y-intercept is 3. So where does my y-intercept happen? Remember, it's the y-axis, so it's the point 3 right here. Okay, so that's our starting point. Now we're going to use our slope to determine our next 2 points. Remember, I only want 3 points. So my m is my slope. Which one of these is attached to the variable? Well, that's 2. So my slope is 2. Now, once I determine my slope, I use what we call rise over run. Okay? Now, whenever you have a slope, you want it to be a fraction. So because 2 is a whole number, how do I make 2 into a fraction? How do I make a whole number into a fraction? Well, that's easy. I just put a 1 under it. So this rise is 2, my run is 1. So again, you take your slope. If your slope is a whole number, you put a 1 under it. If it's not a whole number, like if it's just 1/2, then it's easy. You just rise 1, you run 2. Okay? So, before we get started though, every time I run, I can only run to the right. So only run to the right. So in this case, when I rise up and I run to the right, do not run to the left. Okay? That's when you graph off of the regular rise over run. So we start with 3, and their slope tells me to go up 2. So go up 2 from that dot. So 1, 2, and then over 1. And I can only go over to the right. So this is my new point. Alright, perfect. So all I did was I rose up 2 and I went over 1. Now I don't have any more room to do my next point, so I just go up 2 and over 1. But because I have no more space in my graph, I gotta put a point in the other area. So this area down here. Now because normally I would go up 2 over 1, but this time I'm going in the opposite direction. So instead of going up 2, I'm going to go down 2. So go down 1, 2. And because normally I would go to the right, but because we're not doing a normal point anymore, you go to the opposite side, the left. So whenever you have a graph going, starting from your point, you go up 2 over 1. But since we're going in the opposite direction, you do the opposite points. Last thing, draw your line, and you're done. That's an ugly line, so let's do this again. It's better. Alright, so again, if I put a dot up 2 over 1, and I have no more room, do it from the opposite direction. So go down 2 over to the left. Alright, let's move to the next question. Okay, consider the equation 2x plus 5y. Okay, the first part says, how does this equation look different from slope-intercept form of an equation? For those of you guys that just forgot from 2 seconds ago what slope-intercept form is, slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b. So this question is asking, how does this red equation differ from this equation down here? So what's the difference? What do you guys notice? Well, you should notice that this one has y by itself, and look at where y is. It's not by itself. So the difference is that this equation is not equal to y. This equation is currently equal to 10. Okay, it's not equal to y. Alright? So then it says to rewrite the equation from slope-intercept form to slope-intercept form. So I need to get this equation, 2x plus 5y, equal to 10, and I need to make it equal to y. Put y by itself. So the first thing I need to do is I need to get rid of this 2x. So how do I move this 2x over? So first off, what kind of 2x is this? It's a positive, so the inverse is a negative. So I'm going to subtract 2x, subtract 2x. Okay. I can draw a line through these 2x's and drop down the 5y. Now, this 10 and this 2 are different. This 2 has an x, this 10 doesn't have an x, so I cannot combine the two. Because I can't combine them, I just have to write them out. But if you notice, what goes first, the x or the one without the x? It's mx, so put the negative 2x first, because that one should go first, and then put the 10 in the back. Now what kind of 10 is this? This is a positive 10, so I'm going to put a plus 10. Okay, but I'm not done. I still need to get rid of the 5. So how do I get rid of the 5? I just simply divide 5 to all of these numbers. So I can cross out that 5, and I'm left with y equals negative 2. Remember, you want a fraction, so negative 2 over 5, x plus 10 divided by 5, well 10 divided by 5 is 2. And there's my equation. It's now in slope-intercept form, and now I can identify the slope. So remember, which one is the slope? It's the one always attached to the x. So which problem or which number is attached to the x? The slope is going to be -2/5. So what's the y-intercept? Remember, the y-intercept is the number not attached to the x, and that's going to be 2. So once again, if you look back at the previous problem, where do we start? So let's go ahead and write our numbers in first. So start with 0, then we put 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Go down is negatives, 3, 4, and 5. To the right is positives, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And to the left is negatives, 3, 4, and 5. Alright, so as I mentioned earlier, you always start with the b, and that b is 2. So we're going to start b, 2, and remember, that's the y-intercept, so it hits on the y-axis, so we start on the y-axis, so 2 on the y-axis. Alright, so my slope is my rise over run is going to be a -2/5. So once again, I have to go use my rise over run, but this time I have a negative. Since I have a negative, instead of going up 2, I'm going to go down 2. So I go from 2, I go down 2, so 1, 2. And remember, I always go to the right. So just go to the right. How many am I going to go to the right? I'm going to go to the right 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay. Now if I wanted a point on the opposite side, I would go, instead of down 2, I'd go up 2. So 1, 2. And instead of to the right, I'd go to the left. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And there are my 3 dots. Once I've done that, draw your line. And I'm done. Okay. You guys, I'm going to help you with this first part, and then you got to get it done. And once it's done, you have to show me. So this part, I'm going to help you with. So once again, I got to get this into y equals mx+ b form. So I need to get y by itself. So how do I get rid of the -4 and the -5? So this is a -4. I need to add 4x to both sides. I got to drop down my -5y. Once again, I need my x first, so I got to do 4x. And this is a -10, so -10. They are also not like terms, which is why the answer is not 6. My answer is 4x minus 10. The last step to do is divide by -5. So then I can cross out my -5s, and I'm left with y equals -4/5, because I can't reduce that. 4/5 does not give me a whole number, so I leave it as a fraction. And then negative times a negative is a positive, and 10 divided by 5 is 2. Okay, so now it's your turn to graph this. When you are done graphing it, you need to show me, and you will get your credit. All right.